Disclaimer, this video is not an academic proof. It is a personal case study presented in an edutainment format. The conclusions I provide in this video are based on conjecture and should not be taken as fact. Without reverse engineering the game, we cannot determine the source of AI logic, e.g. to what extent machine learning is utilized, whether the AI is deterministic or non-deterministic, etc. Because I wanted to present my findings in an accessible format, I felt that reasonable assertions were sufficient for this video. People smarter than me can prove or dispute my hypothesis in the future. A lot of people who've been trying out the new Super Ghost Battle mode have been fascinated by it. Seeing your ghost play like you, use your own juggles and flowcharts against you is an incredibly novel fighting game experience.
My bad. My fault. My fault. My fault. Bro, my fault. Bro, my fault. Bro, my fault. Bro, my fault. My fault, bro!
Personally, I was fascinated for other reasons. Before the full game releases and we get to fight each other's ghosts, I wanted to find out just how the ghost learns, figure out its scope, its limits, not just so I can find out how the ghost AI behaves, but the reason behind the specific behavior the ghost was given by the TEKKEN team. I think it'll start making sense as we go, so let's get started. Let's start with a lightning round of what I'm going to call reasonable assertions about the ghost AI's behavior. These are claims that I'm asserting with evidence that, while conjectural, is enough for me to believe with reasonable certainty. This whole video is speculative in nature because it's fun to theorycraft about this stuff. The ghost is trained on the user's data. Nice and simple statement to start with. It only learns when the player is using that character. When I use Kazuya in any of the valid modes, the ghost will be learning. It does not learn when the player is fighting the ghost with a different character. Your Jin ghost cannot learn matchups by playing against it. It can only learn from your perspective. The ghost mimics the player's states based on a set of criteria. This criteria includes positioning, heat, rage, the player's current state, and the opponent's current state. For example, if a ghost blocks a punishable move from the opponent, if it cannot find a node for this situation, it will ignore the punish. Sometimes quite early in, the ghost will stand still and do nothing, because it doesn't have a node that fits the situations in, and it just gets stuck. The ghost AI is an example of a partial function, which essentially means our input set X, which we will call scenarios, does not have a one-to-one mapping with our output set Y, which we will call AI actions. I believe that AI is specifically a non-injective surjective function, which means every AI action is triggered by a unique scenario, but not every scenario will trigger a unique AI action. If this remotely interests you, take a class in mathematical functions. Because of this, the ghost must be taught how to respond to every single move in the game on hit and on block individually. It's too early to say for sure, but it seems these sequences are harder to overwrite. If a player accidentally punishes a -14 move with Kazuya's 1-1-2 instead of an Electric Wind Godfist, the ghost rarely if ever will overwrite the punish with something more optimal. The ghost will mimic players' sequences, e.g. juggles, okizeme, and flowcharts, in neutral until the sequence concludes or is interrupted. The ghost perfectly replicates the player. It executes the player's sequences identically, frame by frame. To do this, the ghost must save both the player's inputs and its states, plus supplementary data into its data tree. Dare I say, a state tree. Just a hunch, a conjectural hypothesis, if you will. Okay, brass tacks. What is a state in this scenario? let me answer that question with another question. In Tekken 7, how many moves do you think Kazuya has? Move list says 80. In actuality, checking with Kilo's moveset editor, he has 2,332. That's a lot of moves. I feel it's more accurate to call these states. This is every possible state the character can be in, from forms of movement to grounded states to unique properties.
Deja vu, I've just been in this place before, higher on the street.
If a move has multiple variants, each of those counts as a unique state. Each hit of a multi-attack move, moves with unique counter-hit animations, every form of movement in the game, from walking forward to bunny hops to rolling forwards off the ground, even unique hit and block stun animations, everything the character can possibly do is counted as a unique state. Even the character being airborne, feet forwards and feet away, count as two different states. This is why I asserted that the ghost needs both the player's inputs and the character's state for its sequences. The ghost performs its sequences at the input level, and it checks the sequences on track at the state level. It also checks the opponent's state. Rather than do this frame by frame, which I imagine would be computationally, I believe the phrase is dense as fuck, it seems to check in chunks. It performs a move or string in the sequence and then checks that both characters are in their appropriate states before continuing. Question 1. What are the cutoff points for the ghost's sequences? Here's my hypothesis. When the ghost blocks or is hit, when both players are in a neutral state, and when the sequence is interrupted, such as by a juggle unexpectedly whiffing or hitting a wall early. The ghost only seems to vary its juggle choices in a few situations. When a launcher connects in neutral, when the opponent lands on a wall, and when a gimmick occurs. In these cases, like in neutral, some sequences may be overwritten after some time, but we don't know for sure. I can only make guesstimations on the data types Bamco are using to store the ghost sequences without the source code. This means the ghost is capable of filling in the blanks. Let's take an example where the player punishes a move and activates heat during the juggle. If a ghost punishes that move and is following that sequence, but doesn't have access to heat at that point in the sequence, it will break the sequence, search its graph for a sequence that matches the current game state, and continue from there. I believe in these cases, if a ghost finds multiple valid sequences, such as multiple valid wall juggles, it will choose randomly. This brings me neatly onto my next question. Question 2. Does the ghost have any agency? I believe the short answer is essentially no. The ghosts are deterministic. Given the same input, they will always compute to the same output once that mapping is defined. The only exception to this rule, so far as I can tell, is when the AI overwrites itself, but I have no idea how that works. We can see that the ghost data in the game files isn't just exponentially ballooning, so we know that AI is discarding data, but I cannot tell what its criteria is. Perhaps it does judge incoming data by some value, but what that is, I cannot determine. If you have a hypothesis for this little mystery, let me know in the comments. When the Super Ghost Battle Mode was announced, the developers used a lot of new wave AI buzzwords like machine learning, and specifically Q-learning, which is a reward-based algorithm, to make it sound like the ghost would take a dataset of your gameplay and extrapolate some optimal AI based on your game logic. That it would know your preferred juggles for situations such as wall carry, when you like to go for Okazeme, your ratio of going mid or low on mix-ups dependent on extenuating factors like life, time, distance, character, positioning. Tekken 8's ghosts do not do this. The ghost cannot calculate, so far as I can tell. I can only assume Q-learning is used in such a way that the commonality of the player's actions and how accurately the ghost reflects that are the reward values rather than objective values like damage, or that it's used when overwriting old data over time, or maybe it's just still a little buggy and I should probably cut it some slack. The closest thing to agency that I believe the ghosts display are its sequences that it likes to stick to no matter how many times you want it to stop doing electric to dash down forward to use a juggle. God damn it, please stop. Everybody who downloads my ghost is going to think I'm a hellish scrub man. Why won't you learn this juggle is bad? The ghost has no concept of good or bad programmed in. Machine learning algorithms in the style of Q-learning have some form of reward system where you give the AI a positive score when it does a thing you want it to do, or a negative score when it chops a fucking electric. Oh my god, I'm gonna reset my save, I hate this. Hypothetically, damage and frames could be rewards. If a ghost had multiple juggle paths to choose from, it could evaluate which juggle does the most damage and ideally leaves them in a positive situation after, or even a situation where they've tended to win out on the follow-up Okazemi more often than not, and lean towards picking that juggle more and more. When things like walls interrupt the juggle, the AI would try other routes, learn wall carries, wall juggles, and over time be able to evaluate a perfect juggle for every scenario. So, I think that is why Bamco didn't want to develop, for lack of a better phrase, smart AI for its ghosts. Not just because AI would learn to the point of being perfect, like in most videos we saw of bots in Tekken 7, but mainly because it's likely any level of smart AI would diverge away from being an accurate reflection of its player. When they revealed the ghost, Namco said players would be able to see their improvement reflected in their ghost over a long period of time. Having AI logic in a ghost would make it either stronger or weaker, depending on whether its decision making is objectively better or worse of a player. So the only way to guarantee ghosts are on the same level is to scrap that entire component. To be clear, this is what I believe to be Namco Bandai's conclusions, and I'm likely off the mark in several points here. I'm also not disparaging their achievement. I think the purpose of the ghost is to be a perfect reflection of its player's style, and they achieved that goal tremendously well. I'll conclude with my perspective. While the ghosts are perfect insofar that they are comprised entirely of their source player's actions and are entirely devoid of AI logic, the ghost fails to capture its actions' intents. Without intent, the ghost cannot make any conclusions on how the player would act on scenarios the ghost isn't trained for. While I'm confident this is an intentional decision by Bamco, I think it's a shame they didn't push this idea further. I believe, when done with the aim of reflecting the player's style and strategy, machine learning could absolutely extrapolate meaningful logic such that ghosts can perform decision making with the same style as its source player. Things like tracking players' preferences in situations like Okazeme and resource management across every scenario, and using regression to create aggregate data based on factors like time, health, character matchups. This is how you can make a ghost that behaves like the player, even in situations the ghost hasn't been trained for yet, rather than the ghost being a mimic, a puppet on strings. Thanks for watching.